Okay, so you want to buy a private island, not a rock, a real one. Palm trees, a dock, a name printed on a nautical chart. You picture the good part immediately, the boat pulling in, the silence, the fact that nobody can reach you. Here is what is not in the brochure. An island does not come with water. It does not come with power. It does not come with a doctor. Everything you take for granted on the mainland, you now have to buy, ship, install, and maintain yourself. That is the business. And it begins the day you sign. Let us start with the number everyone gets wrong. You assume the price tag is the hard part. It is not even the interesting part. Private islands do not cost what people imagine. There are islands in Nova Scotia, in Ontario, in the lakes of Finland and Sweden that sell for under $100,000. Less than a parking space in Hong Kong. Less than a deposit on a 2-bedroom flat in London. There are thousands of them, and many sit on the market for years. At the other end, a developed Bahamian island with a house, a dock, and a name people recognize can list for $75 million and up. The gap between those two numbers is not really about size. It is about one thing, and it is the thing that governs this entire business. Distance from everything else. A cheap island is cheap because nothing reaches it. A cheap island in a cold country has seasonal access, no infrastructure, no power line, no fresh water, and a shoreline that freezes. It is not a paradise. It is a campsite you own. The expensive island is expensive because somebody already solved the hard problems. And the hard problems are the entire cost of this business. Because here is the first rule of island economics, and almost nobody hears it before they sign. The listing price is not the price. It is the entry fee. Industry brokers have a rough working figure for this. For an undeveloped island, the purchase price tends to represent somewhere around half of what you will actually spend to make the place livable. Closing costs, legal work, power, water, a dock, a septic system, a modest house. Add all of it together, and the total lands somewhere near double the sticker price, and often well past it. So a $2 million island is not a $2 million island. It is a $3.5 to $4 million island wearing a $2 million sign. And that assumes you are allowed to build anything at all. Which brings us to the part of this business that nobody puts in the photographs. Before a single boat leaves the dock, you have to answer a question most buyers never think to ask. What, legally, do you actually own? In much of the world, the answer is less than you think. Many countries do not permit foreign nationals to own land outright at all. In those places, what you are buying is not the island. It is a lease, often 99 years, after which the land goes back to the government or to the community that has always held it. Freehold islands, the ones you own permanently, typically trade at a meaningful premium over leasehold ones for exactly that reason. You are paying extra for the word forever. Then there's the beach. In a large number of jurisdictions, the strip of sand below the high water mark is not private property. It belongs to the crown, or the state, or the public, which means the thing on the postcard, the thing you are actually buying the island for, may legally belong to everybody. A boat can anchor offshore. A family can land on your sand and have a picnic. And in many places, you cannot lawfully stop them. Read that again. You can own the island and not own the beach. Then come the permits. An environmental impact assessment on a sensitive coastal site can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars on its own. Building permits, coastal construction licenses, marine works approvals for the dock, legal fees for title verification, because island titles are frequently old, contested, and badly recorded. In some jurisdictions, permanent construction is restricted outright or banned to protect a reef or a nesting site. Those islands are cheap for a reason. The restriction is the price. So before you have poured concrete, You have paid a lawyer, an environmental consultant, a surveyor, a marine engineer, and a government, and you still do not have a house. Now let us build. A house on an island is not a house. It is the same house, plus a shipping problem attached to every single component of it. There are no roads. There is no hardware store. There is no power grid to plug the tools into. Every bag of cement, every window frame, every roof tile, every nail arrives by barge, on a schedule the sea decides. The workers arrive by boat, and if the crossing is rough, they do not arrive at all, and you pay them anyway. If they cannot commute daily, you house them and feed them on site, which means you are building accommodation before you build the thing you actually came to build. The result is that construction on an island commonly runs somewhere between 1.5 and 3 times what the identical building would cost on the mainland. A modest 2,000 square foot home that would cost $300,000 to $500,000 to build on land can cost $500,000 to well over $1 million out on the water. The sea sets the schedule. You do not. And that is the easy part. Now the water. Rainwater catchment works in some climates and fails badly in others. So most serious islands install a desalination plant, a reverse osmosis system that forces seawater through a membrane at high pressure and produces drinking water on the other side. A residential unit capable of producing around 1,000 gallons a day is commonly quoted at $200,000 to $350,000 installed. A system large enough for a resort can pass $800,000. The membranes have a finite life. The pumps have a finite life. The system requires monitoring, servicing, and spare parts, and maintenance alone routinely runs $5,000 to $15,000 a year. Water here is not found. It is manufactured. Then power. There is no grid, so you are the grid. Solar and a battery bank, backed by a diesel generator, because the sun does not always cooperate and the freezer does not care. Then a second generator, because the first one will eventually fail. And when it does, the desalination plant stops. And when that stops, you have no water. Redundancy is not a luxury here. It is survival. Read that chain again, because it is the whole island in one sentence. No fuel means no power. No power means no water. And the fuel arrives by boat. Then waste. There is no sewer, so you build a treatment system. There is no bin collection, so your rubbish leaves the island the same way everything else arrives. By boat, at cost, forever. Then the dock, whose price depends entirely on what the seabed happens to be made of and how hard the sea hits that particular stretch of shore. Add it all up. The realistic figure for turning a bare island into somewhere a human being can comfortably live starts in the low millions, and for anything approaching a resort, moves into the tens of millions. You have now spent everything, and you have not earned a single dollar. Here is where the business turns, and where most people's mental model breaks completely. You would assume that the expensive part of an island is buying it and building on it. One large payment, one large project, and then you are done. That would be logical. It is also exactly wrong, and it is the reason islands ruin people who could easily afford to buy them, because the costs do not stop when the building does. Annual running costs on a developed private island typically land somewhere between $80,000 and $310,000 a year. Not to improve it, not to expand it, to hold it exactly where it is. Property tax, insurance, maintenance, a caretaker, boat transport, utility servicing. Every one of those lines runs whether you are standing on the sand or sitting in an office 4,000 miles away. Take the caretaker. In a tropical climate, an unoccupied building is not stable. Vegetation moves in. Damp moves in. Salt moves in. Leave a house empty on a tropical island for a single season, and it begins to come apart. So you employ someone to live there and fight the island on your behalf, and that is $24,000 to $60,000 a year, every year, whether a guest ever comes or not. You are not hiring staff. You are hiring resistance. Take corrosion. Salt air is not weather. It is a solvent. Air conditioning units, refrigerators, electronics, hinges, screws, the wiring inside the walls. Everything metal on an island is quietly dissolving at all times. Owners routinely budget several % of the value of their equipment every year, purely to replace things that the air is eating. The air is eating your house. Take the boat. It is not a luxury. It is the road. It is the ambulance. It is the supermarket. And like all boats, it demands roughly a tenth of its value every year in fuel, mooring, and repair simply to remain a boat. And here is the line that catches almost everyone. Most people who buy an island plan to visit monthly and end up visiting a few times a year. Life gets in the way. The flights are long. The weather is wrong. The trip gets postponed. The island charges the same either way. That is the structural truth underneath this entire asset class. And it is the same truth that sits underneath a stadium, an airport, and an empty shopping mall. The costs are loyal to nothing. They do not pause because you are busy. They do not shrink because you did not come. The generator burns fuel to keep an empty fridge cold. The caretaker cuts back vegetation from a house nobody has slept in for 8 months. The insurance premium arrives on schedule. You will spend more money on the 350 days you are absent than on the 15 days you are there. So the question becomes obvious. If the thing costs a fortune to hold, how does anybody make money on it? There are only 3 real answers, and only one of them works reliably. The first is rental. You let other people pay for the island when you are not on it. At the top of the market, this is not a small business. Necker Island, in the British Virgin Islands, rents for figures north of $100,000 a night for a full buyout. Other Caribbean islands in the same class charge tens of thousands a night. Those numbers sound like a solved problem. They are not, because the moment you rent an island out, you are no longer an island owner. You are a hotelier. You need staff, and not one caretaker. A luxury private island resort commonly runs a payroll of 15 to 30 people. Managers, chefs, boat captains, housekeepers, engineers, security. You need bookings, which means marketing, an agent or a management company that takes a cut of everything. You need liability insurance, because guests fall over. You need consistency, because a single failed generator during a $100,000 week is not an inconvenience. It is a refund and a review. The revenue is enormous. So is the machine required to collect it. The second answer is development. Buy raw land, get the permits, build the resort, and sell or operate it as a hospitality asset. This is the only version of island ownership that behaves like a genuine business. And it is also the version with the highest failure rate, because it combines the 2 hardest things in real estate: remote construction and tourism demand. Get the permits wrong, and you own a beach. Get the demand wrong, and you own an empty hotel that costs $200,000 a year to keep from rotting. The third answer is appreciation. You hold it, and the value climbs. And in strong markets, it does climb. But islands have a problem that almost no other asset has this severely. There is no market. A house in a city has thousands of potential buyers. An island has, at any given moment, perhaps a handful of people on the entire planet who want that specific island, at that price, in that jurisdiction, at that moment. Brokers who have spent their careers in this business describe islands as an asset you can generally expect to sell about 1 year in 10, not 1 month in 10, 1 year. Which means an island is not really a property investment at all. It is a collectible with a mortgage and a fuel bill. Now let us talk about the man who actually built the market you would be buying into, because he is the reason any of this is possible. In the late 1960s, a German student named Farhad Vladi became fixated on the idea that private islands could be bought and sold like any other real estate. There was no industry. There were no listings. There was no way to find out who owned a rock in the middle of the sea, or whether they wanted to part with it. So he took a local newspaper from the Seychelles, sent 50 Deutschmarks, and placed an advertisement announcing that he was looking for an island. He expected a small classified notice. What he got was a full page. A handful of people replied. One of them had a friend who wanted to sell. In 1971, Vladi completed his first island transaction. He then flew small aircraft along the coasts of Brittany, Ireland, and Scotland, looking down at the water for islands with houses on them, because a house meant an owner, and an owner meant a possible sale. Then he wrote to the mayor of the nearest town and waited weeks for a reply. Over the following 5 decades, His firm brokered something in the region of 3,000 islands and built a database of many thousands more. Here is the part worth sitting with. Vladi did not get rich by owning islands. He got rich by standing between the people who wanted them and the people who had them. He built the road, not the destination. That is a pattern this channel keeps running into. The most reliable money in a fantasy asset class is almost never made by the person living the fantasy. It is made by the person selling it. Now, the fantasy itself. In 1978, a 28-year-old record executive with very little cash heard that an island in the British Virgin Islands was for sale, largely because his company happened to share a name with the archipelago. The asking price was around $6 million, which he did not have anywhere close to. He viewed it anyway. He offered a fraction of the price and was turned down. A year later, the seller still had no buyer and was reportedly desperate. Richard Branson bought Necker Island for $180,000, roughly 3% of the original asking price. It is one of the great property stories of the last century, and it is almost always told wrong, because the price was not the deal. The condition was, the sale required him to build a resort on the island within 4 years. Think about what that actually meant. The cheap part was the island. The expensive part was the obligation that came attached to it. He had to import everything, build everything, power everything, and water everything on a bare 74-acre rock. And he had to do it on a clock, in an era when almost nobody had done it before. Necker did not become one of the most famous private islands on Earth because he bought it cheaply. It became famous because he spent decades and a fortune turning a rock into a business, and then rented it out for 6 figures a night to pay for itself. The island was not the asset. The resort he was forced to build on it was. And then, because this is an island, the sea came. In September 2017, Hurricane Irma moved through the British Virgin Islands as one of the strongest Atlantic storms ever recorded. Necker was directly in its path. Buildings were destroyed. The main house was wrecked. The island was, for a period, simply not a place anyone could stay. This is the risk that sits underneath every single number in this video, and it does not respect how much you paid. In the hurricane belt, property insurance on an island can run somewhere between 2 and 4% of the insured value every year. On a $3 million property, that is $60,000 to $120,000 annually for insurance alone before you have paid a single wage. And that is if you can get cover at all. Some insurers will not write policies on private islands, which leaves owners with one option: self-insure, which is a formal way of saying, if it goes, you pay for it. And the sea does not only arrive as a storm. Beaches move. Sand migrates. The shoreline you bought is not a fixed object. It is a slow-moving one, and coastal erosion can quietly remove the single feature that made the island worth buying. Owners of high-value coastal property spend real money on seawalls, dune restoration, and beach replenishment, which means that on a long enough timeline, you are not maintaining a house. You are maintaining a coastline. So let us total it up the way an actual buyer would. The optimistic version: you buy a developed island in a stable jurisdiction with freehold title, existing infrastructure, and a reef that breaks the swell. The desalination plant works. The caretaker is competent and stays. You rent it for 20 weeks a year at a rate that covers your $200,000 of annual running costs and then some. Tourism in the region grows. Scarcity does the rest, because they are not making more islands. And a decade later, the asset is worth substantially more than you paid, while having cost you nothing to hold. In that version, an island is one of the few genuinely irreplaceable assets on Earth, and you own one. The harder version: you buy raw land, and the permits take 3 years instead of 1. The barge costs run over. The build lands at double the estimate, which on an island is not unusual, it is typical. The desalination plant fails in the 2nd year, and the replacement membranes take 6 weeks to arrive. Your caretaker leaves, and the vegetation takes the guest house in a single wet season. The insurer declines to renew after a bad storm year, so you carry the risk yourself. Bookings are thin because a competitor 200 miles away has a better airstrip. And when you finally decide to sell, you discover the thing every island owner discovers eventually. There are almost no buyers, and the ones who exist know exactly how much your fixed costs are, because they are the same as theirs. The difference between those two outcomes has almost nothing to do with the beauty of the island. It has to do with the depth of the water at the dock, the jurisdiction on the title, the price of diesel, and the path of a storm that has not formed yet. So if you do decide to buy a private island, understand what you are actually buying. You are not buying land. Land is the cheapest part of this. You are buying a permanent, personal obligation to manufacture, on your own, in the middle of the sea, every single service that a city provides for free, without ever telling you it is doing it. An island is not a property. It is a supply chain with a beach attached. And the supply chain runs whether you are standing on the sand or not.